Hey guys, tonight we slip into the echoing stone chambers of a medieval castle, where the walls breathe out cold like some ancient beast and the air carries a damp bite that seeps straight into your bones. You've got no double-glazed windows, no thermostat to crank, not even a blanket fresh from the dryer. Just you, a slab of drafty architecture, and the kind of chill that makes you question every life choice that led you here. You probably won't survive this without turning into a popsicle. But hey, that's half the fun of imagining it, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments. It's always fun seeing this little community light up across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stone walls around you rise high, rough and unyielding, built to withstand sieges and battering rams, not to keep you cozy at bedtime. They're thick, sometimes up to 10 feet across, yet they don't trap warmth. Instead, they radiate a bone-deep cold, like someone lined the walls with ice packs. You run your hand along the stones, and it comes away damp. The castle sweating through the night air. Modern central heating would laugh at this setup. You shuffle across the uneven flagstone floor, each step echoing in the emptiness. And notice there are no rugs underfoot, unless you're royalty. Even then, the luxury is more like a worn tapestry tossed across the floor, barely enough to keep your toes from freezing. Historians still argue whether tapestries were more for warmth or just flexing wealth. But either way, they weren't doing miracles against the draft. The windows, oh, the windows. You'd expect thick glass panes, maybe even shutters, but nope. At best, you get horn or oiled parchment stretched across the frames, letting in light, but not blocking much wind. You feel the gusts push against your cheeks, carrying the smell of smoke, livestock, and that delightful hint of no one has bathed this month. Medieval castles had personalities, and most of them smelled like an old boot left out in the rain. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some castles did try stuffing hay, moss, or even rags into window gaps to reduce the drafts. Imagine being the poor servant tasked with window stuffing duty. You'd probably mutter to yourself the whole time, knowing tomorrow's wind will undo everything. Still better than nothing. You crawl toward your bed, or what passes for one. At this point in the night, you're already wearing half your wardrobe indoors, layers of wool. Linen, maybe a cloak if you've got one. A hood covers your ears, and still the cold gnaws at you. You can see your breath fogging the air, curling like ghostly ribbons that fade into the shadows above. The flicker of a candle does nothing for warmth. It just makes the gloom slightly less oppressive. Sometimes people slept closer to the kitchens, not because they loved the smell of roasting meat, but because that was the only reliably warm spot in the castle. Picture yourself nodding off with the distant sizzle of pork fat and the rhythmic clank of cauldrons in the background. Not exactly peaceful, but warmer than the icy chambers upstairs. It's worth remembering that medieval castles weren't built to pamper. They were fortresses first, homes second. Every thick stone wall whispered, "We'll keep out the enemy, but don't expect us to keep out the frost." You can almost hear the stones chuckle as you huddle deeper into your bed later tonight. But don't get too comfortable, because in this world, warmth isn't guaranteed, and sleep is less about dreams and more about survival. You lie back, feeling the cold sink into your bones, knowing tomorrow you'll need every ounce of energy just to push through another day of damp walls. drafty windows, and the eternal war against the medieval night. You lower yourself onto the bed, if we can call it that, and quickly realize it's not just a place to sleep, it's a survival chamber. Forget the idea of one dainty blanket pulled up to your chin. In this castle, you're layering like a medieval onion. Wool sheet, linen sheet, another wool sheet, then animal furs piled on top until you start to feel the weight pressing down on your chest like a sleepy bear. Each layer is precious, each one trapping the tiniest bit of warmth your body can generate. The first thing you notice is how heavy it all feels. These aren't light polyester comforters you can toss aside with a kick. No, these are thick, scratchy, hand-woven monsters that could probably double as horse blankets. Once you're under them, your committed rolling over requires a small workout. But there's comfort in that weight too. A pressure that feels a little like being hugged by history itself. Historians still argue whether linen sheets were common across all social classes or reserved mostly for the wealthy. What's certain is that nobles loved layering fine linen beneath wool or fur, partly because linen felt smoother against the skin. You sigh with relief when you find a linen layer in your pile. Scratchy wool directly on bare skin is a recipe for itching all night long. You start to notice how the bed itself transforms into a kind of fortress. Curtains, sometimes plain, sometimes decorated, hang down from wooden frames or canopies, closing you into your own private cocoon. At first glance, it looks decorative, like something you'd see in a romantic period drama. But you soon realize it's less about romance and more about keeping your nose attached to your face. Those curtains trap your body heat, cutting the draft and keeping the bed chamber just a degree or two warmer than the icy room outside. That tiny bump in temperature, it's the difference between shivering awake and drifting into uneasy dreams. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some households, bed curtains weren't just for warmth or privacy. They doubled as protection against fleas and other unwelcome critters that liked to drop down from the thatched roof or the beams overhead. Imagine lying there in the dark, feeling something tickle your face, and hoping it's just a loose feather. Curtains suddenly feel like the world's most necessary invention. You shift under the covers, and the smell of the bedding hits you. Wool carries a faint sheepy tang no matter how much it's washed, and fur blankets add an earthy musk. Linen, if it's well kept, smells faintly of soap or herbs used during laundering. But that's only if your castle servants are on top of things. Otherwise, you're curling up in whatever scent lingers from the last wash, which might have been weeks ago. Cozy? Yes, but in a nose-goes-numb-anyway kind of way. The layering ritual itself feels almost sacred. You picture servants bustling about before bed, laying down each sheet, each fur, carefully folding and tucking like they're constructing armor. In a way, they are. This bed isn't just furniture, it's your shield against the elements. Without these layers, the night could be genuinely dangerous. People really did die of cold, especially children and the elderly. And everyone knew that warmth at night wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. Now imagine the social divide. If you're a noble, your bed is piled with all the good stuff: fine linens, imported furs, feather-stuffed quilts. If you're lower ranking, you might get a couple of rough woolen blankets. And good luck if they've still got moth holes in them. That difference between layers could mean the difference between waking up stiff and sore or not waking up at all. But here's the funny part. No matter how fancy the bedding, everyone still looked ridiculous once they were tucked in with a nightcap on your head, wool stockings pulled up, a tunic bunched under the covers, and blankets piled so high you can barely move. You look less like a glamorous medieval lord and more like a bundled-up burrito, trying not to freeze. Practicality has no mercy on dignity. As you lie there, the weight of the layers pulling you deeper into the mattress, you start to feel the cocoon effect. The wind rattles at the shutters. The stone walls groan with cold. But inside your layered fortress, you're warm enough to start drifting. The contrast is striking. Your nose still tingles, but your body is snug, like a tiny pocket of life carved out in a frozen world. It's not perfect, but it's enough. And in that dim glow of candlelight fading to embers, you start to appreciate how much effort went into something we take for granted today. Not just a bed, but a fortress of fabric. A layered shield between your fragile body and the endless medieval night. You sink a little deeper into the bed fortress. But now you notice something odd beneath your back. It's lumpy, uneven, almost alive with texture. That's because medieval mattresses weren't the plush, memory foam clouds you're used to. Instead, they were usually big fabric sacks, stuffed with whatever filler people could get their hands on. For the wealthy, that might mean goose feathers or down. Light and insulating, puffed into something that felt almost luxurious. For everyone else, it was straw, hay, or maybe dried reeds, all of which poked through the cloth like nature's way of reminding you that comfort was a privilege. You wiggle around trying to find a smooth spot, but every time you shift, another stalk of straw scratches your shoulder. And here's the thing, straw mattresses weren't just itchy, they were noisy. Every toss and turn produced a crunchy rustle, like you were rolling in a barn. Imagine trying to sneak a midnight snack without waking the whole room. Not happening. Now, historians still argue whether feather mattresses were common outside of noble households. Some evidence suggests that even moderately well-off merchants might splurge on one for the master bed, while others think feathers were far too valuable, reserved almost exclusively for high-ranking nobles and the church. Either way, if you've got feathers under you tonight, consider yourself the spoiled one of the group. Of course, straw had its quirks beyond being uncomfortable. Over time, it attracted insects, lice, and other delightful crawlies that loved the warm, cozy environment. Beds were breeding grounds for pests, which meant people often emptied the mattresses seasonally and replaced the straw. If you're lucky, you've got fresh stuffing tonight. If not, well, don't think too hard about what's crawling around in there with you. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Some mattresses were stuffed with dried pea pods or even moss. Moss sounds romantic, right? Soft, green, natural. Except when it starts to rot from lingering damp. Imagine snuggling into what feels like a swamp pillow. Suddenly, straw doesn't sound so bad. For extra padding, some people layered the mattress over ropes strung across the wooden bed frame. These ropes sagged over time, so servants tightened them regularly, a chore so common it gave rise to the old phrase, sleep tight. You run your hand along the side of the bed frame and notice the rope marks, frayed from years of being tightened, loosened and re-tightened. Without that upkeep, you'd find yourself rolling into the middle like a burrito in a hammock. The smell of the mattress is its own story. Feather beds sometimes carried a faint barnyard aroma, thanks to the feathers not being fully cleaned. Straw, meanwhile, smelled like the field it came from, pleasant at first, until moisture and sweat turned it musty. Add in the smoke from the fireplace, the sweat from your layered clothes, and maybe the faint tang of chamber pots nearby, and you've got yourself an olfactory cocktail you won't soon forget. You shift again and realize There's no pillow in the modern sense. Instead, you've got to bolster a long roll of fabric stuffed with feathers, wool, or even more straw. It props up your head, though not exactly comfortably. Sometimes nobles had multiple bolsters stacked, while common folk made do with their bundled-up cloak. Either way, you're not resting your head on a cloud, more like a lumpy log. Still, there's something endearing about the whole setup. It's resourceful, practical, and very medieval. People used what they had, and a mattress wasn't about luxury. It was about surviving the night without freezing to death on bare stone. You find yourself adjusting, shifting until your body molds into the lumps and ridges. And eventually, you get used to it. Humans adapt, even when the bed feels like it's stuffed with pine cones. And in that strange blend of discomfort and coziness, you start to drift. The mattress rustles beneath you, a crunchy lullaby of straw and history. And you realize this is how generations of people slept, night after night, long before memory foam was a twinkle in anyone's eye. You blink up at the canopy overhead, its heavy fabric draped like a tent above your lumpy mattress. At first glance, it looks ornamental, the sort of thing movie castles throw in just to make royalty look fancier. But lying here, you start to realize the canopy has a much more practical job. It isn't just for show, it's a shield, a barrier between you and the frozen, drafty air swirling through the chamber. The curtains hang thick, some woven of wool, others of velvet if you're lucky, and they fall all around the bed like fortress walls within fortress walls. You reach out to tug one shut, and instantly you feel the difference. The air inside the canopy cocoon traps your breath, your body heat, and even the faint warmth from the fire across the room. Outside the curtains, icy drafts sneak through cracks in the shutters, enough to make your nose tingle. Inside, it's just a degree or two warmer, but in medieval nights, those few degrees could be the difference between sleeping and shivering till dawn. Historians still argue whether bed curtains were universal in castles or reserved for the wealthiest households. Some records suggest even middling gentry had simple cloth hangings, while others point out that the cost of heavy fabric made them a true luxury. What's certain, though, is that where they existed, they weren't just about privacy, they were survival gear. And here's the quirky tidbit. The canopy wasn't just blocking drafts from the sides. It also kept out things falling from above. Remember, many castle roofs weren't perfectly sealed, and rafters often housed birds, bats, or bugs. A canopy meant fewer droppings or creepy crawlies, landing on your face in the middle of the night. Imagine being half asleep, feeling a tiny plop on your cheek, and realizing, oh great, the pigeons are back. Suddenly, you're very grateful for thick curtains. The canopy also gave people a sense of privacy in households, where privacy barely existed. Servants walked in and out, family members shared rooms, and personal space was a foreign concept. But once you pulled those curtains shut, it was just you in your own little world. Sure, the draft still whistled, the mattress still rustled, and the smell of smoke still clung to everything. But at least it felt like your space, your miniature kingdom within the castle walls. You trace the embroidery on one corner of the curtain, noticing faded patterns of vines and flowers. Nobles often showed off wealth with embroidered bed hangings, their designs speaking of status as much as comfort. Even so, the stitches also served another purpose. Extra layers of thread meant thicker fabric, which meant warmer sleep. Practicality hiding in plain sight, of course. There's a trade-off. With the curtains pulled tight, the air gets stuffy fast, You feel your breath condense in the small enclosed space, warming it, but also making it humid. Too many people sharing one bed? Suddenly, the canopy feels less like a cozy cocoon and more like a medieval sweat lodge. Still, compared to icy drafts nipping at your toes, you take the stuffiness. You shift under the blankets, listening to the faint snap of the fire across the room, and wonder how many secrets these curtains have held. They were places for whispered conversations, hushed prayers, even the occasional midnight snack smuggled in. Some even believed the curtains protected against evil spirits, as though the thick cloth could keep nightmares and demons at bay. You chuckle at the thought, but then again when you're this cold, you're willing to believe anything if it helps you sleep. It's funny how a piece of fabric could transform a bed into a fortress. The castle walls kept out invading armies, but these bed curtains, they kept out drafts, pests, and maybe even the odd wandering ghost story. You tuck yourself deeper into the cocoon, grateful for the extra shield, and let the fabric's muffled stillness wrap you up like a second skin. And as the night deepens, you realize you're not just sleeping under a canopy. You're sleeping under history itself. Each stitch and curtain fold whispering that survival sometimes came draped in velvet. The fire across the chamber sputters, sending little sparks up into the smoke-darkened air. You roll slightly to catch the warmth, but quickly realize it's more illusion than reality. Castles might boast grand fireplaces wide enough, in some cases, to roast a whole boar, but the heat they produced rarely stretched. More than a few feet past that, the warmth disappeared into the cavernous space, swallowed whole by stone walls that seemed to drink it in like thirsty giants. You sit up a little and notice how the smoke curls lazily upward, but not all of it escapes through the chimney. Some lingers in the room, coating the ceiling with a sooty film. You cough gently. It's not enough to choke you outright, but it's always there, tickling the throat, stinging the eyes. Imagine falling asleep every night, with a light haze of smoke clinging to your nostrils. On the bright side, smoke kept some insects at bay. Who needs citronella candles when your entire bedchamber smells like you've been sitting in a campfire? Historians still argue whether fireplaces were consistently effective in medieval castles. Some say they revolutionized indoor heating when they replaced the smoky, central hearths of earlier halls. Others point out that without proper insulation, the heat just raced up the chimney, leaving rooms barely warmer than before. You can almost picture the masons shaking their heads, muttering, well, it looked impressive at least. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some castles, people heated stones in the fireplace, then carried them wrapped in cloth to bed for extra warmth. But the downside? Sometimes those stones cracked or popped from the heat, sending little shards flying. Imagine being tucked in under your cozy blanket fortress, only for a hot rock to explode at your feet. Medieval life was never boring. The closer you sit to the hearth, the toastier you feel. But that comfort comes at a price. Your front feels pleasantly warm, while your back remains icy cold. It's like being half-baked bread done on one side, raw on the other. You turn frequently, trying to balance it out, and soon realize it's a never-ending dance. Rotate toward the fire. Roast your shins, spin away. Freeze your spine. Not exactly the restful prelude you were hoping for. You glance around the chamber, and the flickering shadows play tricks on the walls. Firelight makes the carved stones come alive. Gargoyle-like shapes dancing as the flames crackle. It's mesmerizing but also eerie, especially when the wind moans through a crack in the shutter. You pull the bed curtains a little tighter, deciding the less you see of those shadow monsters, the better. And then there's the smell. Fireplaces in medieval castles weren't burning clean, seasoned wood. Often it was green timber, smoky peat, or even dried animal dung, depending on availability. Each fuel left its own signature scent. Tonight, your room smells faintly of peat, a thick, earthy aroma, not unpleasant, but heavy enough to linger in your clothes. If you were hoping to wake up fresh as a daisy, forget it. You're going to smell like a campfire for the foreseeable future. Some castles had chimneys so badly designed that backdrafts of smoke filled the room whenever the wind shifted. You imagine dozing peacefully, only to wake with watery eyes as the chamber suddenly becomes a smokehouse. But hey, at least you're warm, sort of. And if you were a servant, you wouldn't even have the luxury of this smoky chamber. You'd sleep in the kitchens themselves, curled near the great ovens, or in drafty halls where you had to depend on other bodies for warmth. In that light, even a smoky, half-effective fireplace feels like a gift. So you shuffle closer to the bed, tug the blankets higher, and thank the flickering flames for what little they offer. The fire may be moody, smoky, and stubborn, but in a medieval castle, it's still the closest thing you've got to a central heating system. You tug the blankets a little tighter and notice something else about your setup tonight. You're practically wearing half your wardrobe to bed. In a world where central heating doesn't exist and fireplaces can only do so much, your body becomes its own furnace, and clothing is the insulation. You look down at yourself and chuckle softly. You're dressed less like someone heading to bed, and more like someone heading out for a chilly morning chore. First, a long linen or woolen shift clings to your skin, the medieval version of pajamas. Over that, maybe another tunic, or even two if you're particularly cold. Your legs are snugly wrapped in hose, the medieval equivalent of long underwear. Then there's the pie CD assistance, the nightcap. It's not just a goofy cartoon accessory, it's essential. Without it, your ears freeze, and you wake up with the kind of headache only a drafty night can deliver. And socks, oh yes, socks. You wriggle your toes inside thick woolen ones, scratchy but warm. For wealthier folk, stockings were made of softer weaves, sometimes even silk for the absurdly rich. For most, it was good, honest wool, maybe patched up by a servant's needle more times than you can count. Historians still argue whether everyone really wore socks to bed. But let's be honest, if your toes are turning into ice cubes, you're not going to be picky. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some people even slept wearing mittens, especially children. Imagine tucking in for the night, hands wrapped like little loaves of bread, trying not to smack yourself in the face while you roll over. Not exactly glamorous, but your fingers would thank you come morning. The weight of the clothing is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's cozy, you feel bundled, protected. On the other, it makes turning in bed a struggle. You're wrapped in layers, pinned by blankets. Your movement restricted, like you volunteered for the world's least fun burrito challenge. You try to shift positions and feel every seam tug against your body. Rolling over, a full-body commitment. There's also the question of hygiene. You can't exactly toss your nightshirt into a washing machine every few days. Laundry was a laborious process involving boiling water, harsh soap, and hours of drying by the hearth. So night clothes were worn again and again before being washed. By the end of winter, your shift might be less a garment and more a fabric fossil, stiff with use. But hey, you're not here to win a fashion show. You're here to not freeze. The best part of medieval nightwear might be the hooded garments. Some folks wore coifs, close-fitting caps, tied under the chin that kept heat from escaping through the head. combined with a long woolen hood that could double as a scarf. You are basically a wrapped package of warmth. You tug your hood tighter tonight, and though you look like you're preparing for a trek across the Alps, you're actually just lying in bed. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of multiple layers. Servants often went to sleep in the same clothes they worked in all day. A sweaty tunic, stiff with grime, became their nightwear by default. You imagine rolling into bed after mucking stables or scrubbing pots, still smelling faintly of manure or grease. Comfort was relative, and survival didn't always leave room for fresh outfits. You ran your hands over the thick wool on your arms and marvel at how something so simple, cloth spun from sheep's fleece, could stand between you and frostbite. It's itchy, yes, but in the middle of a winter night in a stone fortress, itchiness is the least of your worries. You'd rather scratch than freeze. And as you tuck your cap a little lower over your ears, you realize medieval night clothes weren't about looking good or even feeling comfortable. They were about engineering a wearable cocoon, about keeping your extremities warm enough to greet the dawn. Without them, your layered bed fortress would be incomplete, and the castle night would creep in to claim you. So you snuggle deeper, socks on, hood tied, mittens optional, and let your fabric armor hold you against the biting dark. The bed feels smaller tonight, not because it's shrinking, but because you're sharing it. In the medieval world, sleep wasn't always a solitary affair. You roll to one side, bump into an elbow, shuffle back, and still find someone's feet nudging yours. Welcome to the age of communal sleeping, where body heat was currency and personal space was a luxury no one could afford. If you're a noble, you might share with your spouse, children, or visiting relatives. If you're lower on the social ladder, you're probably bundled in with siblings, servants, or even fellow travelers passing through. The idea of having a whole bed to yourself? Almost laughable. Beds were for sharing, not hoarding. And tonight, you're wedged right in the middle of that truth. The first thing you notice is the warmth. With multiple bodies tucked under the same mound of blankets, the temperature rises quickly. It's like a medieval heating system powered by human furnaces. The more people, the warmer it gets, though it's not always evenly distributed. You shuffle closer to the middle for maximum warmth, then regret it as someone's knee jabs into your side. Survival is a group effort, but it's not always comfortable. Historians still argue whether nobles shared beds for warmth alone, or whether it was also a matter of etiquette and intimacy. Some sources suggest kings and queens often invited high-ranking guests to share their beds, not romantically, but as a sign of trust and honor. Imagine being told, "Congratulations. You get to sleep next to the king tonight. No pressure. Just try not to snore." Here's a quirky tidbit. Even legal documents mention bed sharing. In some court cases, witnesses testified about overhearing conversations while lying in bed beside so-and-so. Privacy wasn't just rare, it was practically non-existent. Your secrets were never safe. Not when 2 or 3 pairs of ears were pressed into the same pillow, of course. There were drawbacks. You're trying to sleep, but the person next to you snores like a blacksmith's bellows. Another one mutters in their dreams, kicking occasionally as though fighting invisible FOs. Someone else hogs the covers, leaving you clutching at scraps of wool. It's chaotic, uncomfortable, and yet oddly reassuring. The human presence makes the night less eerie, the castle less cavernous. Even the drafts feel weaker when you're packed together like sardines. Children especially were rarely left to sleep alone. They piled in with parents or siblings, tucked into the warmth of a shared nest. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. A child left in a cold bed risked freezing in the harsher winters. Tonight, you feel a little hand grab your sleeve in the dark, instinctively clinging for warmth. And you realize this wasn't just tradition, it was necessity. You grin in the darkness at the thought that even noble beds weren't immune to chaos. Court records describe great beds big enough for 4, 5, even 6 people. And let's be honest, the more people, the higher the chance that someone lets out a midnight fart. You try not to laugh as the thought hits you. Even kings had to endure that indignity. By now, you've accepted that bed sharing isn't optional, it's part of castle life. You wiggle into a more comfortable position, half on your side, half squashed between layers of humanity. The warmth is undeniable, and soon, the noise fades into a strange lullaby snores, sighs, shifting bodies, all blending into a rhythm as steady as the crackle of the fire. And in that rhythm, you finally understand the medieval philosophy. The night was cold, long and full of drafts, but together pressed shoulder to shoulder. Wrapped under the same blankets, you made it through. You shift slightly in the crowded bed, careful not to elbow your neighbor, and feel something hard and oddly warm pressed near your feet. At first, you think it's someone's bony heel. But no, it's smoother, hotter, almost metallic. You wriggle your toes around it and realize you've encountered one of medieval sleep's strangest little inventions, the hot brick or warming pan. Before crawling under the mountain of blankets, servants often heated bricks or stones in the fireplace until they were nearly glowing. Then they wrapped them in cloth or tucked them into wooden boxes to keep them from scorching the sheets. Tonight, one of those bricks has found its way into your bed. You press your toes against it, sighing in relief as the heat seeps through your socks. For a brief, glorious moment, you forget the draft swirling around the canopy and the icy stone floor beyond. But here's the gamble to close, and you risk singeing your blanket, or worse, your feet. People really did burn themselves on overheated warming devices. Imagine explaining that scar. Ah yes, I lost half my toes. To bedtime. It's not the heroic story you'd want carved on your tombstone. Historians still argue about how widespread these warming contraptions were. Some claim they were common in wealthier households, especially among nobility. Others believe they were luxuries, with most common folk relying on sheer layers and body heat. What's undeniable is that the thought of crawling into a pre-warmed bed was so delightful that people went to great lengths to make it happen. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households used long-handled metal pans filled with glowing embers to warm sheets before bedtime. Servants slid the pan between the covers, moving it back and forth like some medieval ironing board. Effective. Yes. Safe? Not really. There are stories of sheets catching fire when someone gets careless. Picture drifting off to sleep, only to realize your bed is now a bonfire. Sweet dreams indeed. You stretch your legs, enjoying the fading warmth of the brick. It doesn't last long, stone cools quickly. But the psychological comfort is enormous. That first rush of heat makes you believe, just for a moment, that the night won't be so bad. Of course, half an hour later, the brick feels more like a lump of cold rock pressing into your toes, and you shove it aside with a mutter. Still better to have had it than not. You can imagine the nightly ritual. Servants scurrying between the kitchen and bedchambers, juggling hot stones, iron bottles, and warming pans, trying not to drop them or scorch themselves in the process. Somewhere, a tired servant is probably cursing the invention. swearing that if one more lord demands a perfectly heated bed, they'll toss the brick out the nearest window. The act of gathering for supper was part of the ritual. Imagine the hall glowing with firelight, goblets clinking, the smell of roasted onions and garlic filling the air. Everyone was eating, not just for taste, but for survival. By the time people climbed into bed, their bodies were humming with stored heat, like logs after a fire. You're part of that rhythm now, fed, warmed, ready for the night ahead. Of course, there was a risk of overindulgence. Too much ale, and you're stumbling to the chamber pot in the cold dark, cursing your choices. Too much greasy meat, and you're sweating under your wool layers, trying to kick off blankets you can barely lift. Medieval life had no middle ground. It was feast or famine, too hot or too cold, and rarely just right. You pull the covers tighter, your stomach pleasantly weighted. And imagine how strange it must have been to depend so directly on food for warmth. Today, you eat because you're hungry or bored. Then, you ate because it could mean the difference between sleeping or shivering. A full belly was a heater, a shield, and sometimes a prayer against frostbite. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the memory of warm broth lingers, wrapping you in comfort almost as much as the wool above. You let it carry you further into the night, your medieval furnace stoked and humming, ready to keep you safe till dawn. The stew sits warmly in your belly, but you're not the only furnace in the room. You roll slightly, and at the foot of the bed, you feel something furry shift. It's not a blanket, it's alive. You peek down and spot a dog curled against your legs, its body heat radiating up through the covers like the world's most loyal hot water bottle. Welcome to the medieval animal heating system, where man's best friend was also man's best radiator. Dogs were common bedfellows, especially in castles. They weren't just companions, they were warmth on for legs. A hunting hound curled against your feet could mean the difference between numb toes and a restful night. Tonight, your hound stirs, stretches, and sighs, then settles back into a deep snore. You wiggle your toes into his side, grateful for the heat he shares without complaint. But it wasn't just dogs. Cats found their way into beds too, chasing away mice before curling up on laps and chests. Small livestock sometimes shared living quarters with humans, particularly in harsher climates or poorer households. Sheep, goats, even pigs were known to huddle close, their body heat turning the chamber into a barnyard blanket. Imagine drifting off while a pig snuffles beside you. It's not exactly romantic, but it's warm. Historians still argue how common animal co-sleeping was among nobility. Some say it was frowned upon in refined circles, while others point to portraits and records, showing prized lapdogs nestled right into bed. Among peasants, though, there's little doubt. Animals weren't just companions. They were part of the nightly heating plan. Here's a quirky tidbit. The phrase, three-dog night, is said to come from the idea that on the coldest nights, you needed 3 dogs in bed just to keep from freezing. Whether the saying is truly medieval is debated, but lying here tonight, 1 dog already makes a difference. You can only imagine how luxurious 3 would feel. Of course, the animal heating system wasn't without drawbacks. Your hound smells faintly of the hunt-wet fur, old leather, and the faint tang of whatever he rolled in earlier. His snores rattle louder than some humans. And then there's the flea situation. Animals brought warmth, but they also brought pests, hopping happily from fur to sheets to skin. You scratch your ankle absent-mindedly, wondering if tonight's itch's wool fibers are something more lively. Still, the comfort outweighs the risks. The steady weight of the dog at your feet is reassuring. His breathing rhythmic, his warmth steady. In a castle filled with drafts, echoing halls, and eerie nighttime creaks, the presence of an animal feels grounding, anchoring you to something alive and familiar. You close your eyes and imagine the great hall below, where servants and guards might be sprawled out with dogs at their sides, or where peasants in cottages outside the walls bedded down with pigs tucked close. It wasn't sentimentality, it was survival. And survival doesn't care if you're bedmate occasionally. Licks their paws in the middle of the night. The hound shifts again, pressing closer, and you can't help but smile. Fireplaces sputter, blankets itch, hot bricks fade. But a living, breathing creature never stops radiating heat. You nudge him gently with your toes, earning a sleepy grunt in return, and realize that in this medieval night, you've got the best heating system of all warmth with a heartbeat. The dog at your feet stirs, ears flicking at a sound beyond the thick curtains. And suddenly, you're reminded that warmth isn't the only thing affecting your sleep. You listen, holding your breath, and hear it too, the faint creak of a door opening somewhere down the corridor, followed by the muffled clank of boots. Castle nights are never truly quiet, and the interruptions come from more than just snoring bedmates. You shift under the blankets, peeking past the canopy, and feel the draft immediately. A ribbon of icy air snakes through the gap, raising goosebumps on your arms. That's the curse of castles, walls thick enough to withstand sieges, yet riddled with gaps where cold winds whistle through. Doors that don't quite fit their frames, arrow slits that double as air vents, windows covered only with oiled cloth or wooden shutters. You may be inside stone walls, but you're never sealed from the elements. Historians still argue. How effective castle architecture really was at keeping out drafts? Some point to evidence of tapestries and wall hangings designed to trap warmth, while others suggest that unless you were in the deepest chambers, you'd feel the winter winds sneaking in. Either way, tonight you're keenly aware that insulation wasn't exactly a medieval specialty. Here's a quirky tidbit. People sometimes hung heavy, leather or fur across doors to block the worst of the drafts. In some records, servants were tasked with nailing thick cloth over gaps before winter set in, turning rooms into makeshift tents inside stone shells. Imagine a lord demanding new draperies, not for fashion, but just to stop his beard from freezing overnight. The sounds beyond the chamber remind you of another reality: guards patrolling the corridors. Their boots echo against the stone floors, a steady rhythm of vigilance that both comforts and irritates. On one hand, you know they're there to keep watch, ensuring no intruder sneaks through the gates. On the other, their noise breaks the fragile illusion of nighttime peace. Every time a torch flares or a sword hilt clanks, you stir and wonder if it's trouble or just another round through the halls. Then there are the servants moving at odd hours. Fires need stoking, animals need tending, and chamber pots need carrying. You imagine some poor servant tiptoeing past your door, trying not to wake the lord and lady, only to bump a tray against the wall. Life in a castle never fully paused, and that meant your sleep never truly sank into silence. You curl tighter, pulling the covers around your ears to block the whispers of air and noise. Your dog growls softly, but then sighs and settles back down, deciding the disturbance isn't worth the energy. You envy his ease. For you, the awareness of every creak and rustle lingers, turning your bed into a half-safe, half-exposed nest, and that's the irony. Castles were built for defense, yet their very size and structure left sleepers vulnerable to restless nights. Guards kept enemies out, but their presence kept your brain half awake. Drafts slipped in through arrow slits designed to repel attackers. Even heavy doors groaned like tired giants when opened, making stealth impossible but sleep fragile. Still, you let yourself drift, listening to the mix of sounds wind through cracks, guards on rounds, servants whispering, fire sputtering. It's the heartbeat of the castle, and whether you find it soothing or annoying depends on how tired you are. Tonight, exhaustion tips the scale. The draft is cold, the noise is persistent, but wrapped in your layers and warmed by your hound, you find yourself melting into slumber anyway, carried along by the living pulse of the fortress. You tuck yourself deeper into your layered fortress of sheets, grateful that tonight you're spared the sardine pile, but aware that for most of medieval society, that communal slumber was the reality. Privacy belonged to the few, the rest, they found comfort not in solitude, but in the strange, chaotic embrace of the crowd. The image of the hall full of snoring bodies fades, and your mind shifts to something quieter, more solemn. Before anyone truly settled into sleep, whether in a curtained bed or on the floor, there was one ritual that almost always came first: prayer. You pull the blanket around your chin, and in the flickering firelight, you can picture it clearly. Men and women kneeling at their bedsides, crossing themselves, whispering words to ward off the cold, the dark, and whatever unseen things might creep in during the night. For you, the act feels instinctive. You clasp your hands, whisper a few words, and feel a different kind of warmth, less about body heat, more about reassurance. In the Middle Ages, the night was full of fears, illness, demons, restless spirits, even the possibility of attack. Saying prayers before bed was a way to hand those fears over to something bigger than yourself. You murmur a pater noster, letting the rhythm soothe you, your voice nearly drowned by the crackle of the hearth. Historians still argue how strictly people followed these nightly rituals. Some suggest that prayers before sleep were universal, drilled into daily life by the church. Others note that records of late-night revelry, drinking, and bawdy jokes imply that not everyone was whispering psalms before crawling into bed. Yet even in the rowdiest households, the fear of nighttime's dangers probably pushed many to at least mumble a hurried Ave Maria before shutting their eyes. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval prayer books included specific blessings for beds. Yes, there were literally lines of text designed to sanctify your straw mattress and wool blankets, as though holiness itself could keep out the cold. Imagine flipping through a psalter, finding the section labeled for protection against bad dreams, and thinking, perfect, that'll keep the goblins away. For monks and nuns, the ritual went further. Their sleep was interrupted deliberately by matins or vigils, the midnight prayers that broke the night in two. Picture yourself being nudged awake in the cold, trudging down a stone corridor, chanting by candlelight in the chapel while your stomach grumbles. Sleep was never just about comfort, it was about discipline and devotion. In fact, the rhythm of waking in the middle of the night may have shaped ordinary sleep patterns, too, giving rise to the idea of first sleep and second sleep, separated by a quiet period of wakefulness. Even for layfolk, prayers served as a kind of shield, a whispered blessing for protection against thieves, a plea to keep sickness away, a small chant against the creeping frost. In a world without electric light or central heating, faith offered the kind of insulation no amount of wool could match. You let your whispered prayer trail off, listening to the silence settle in the room. Your dog sighs, the fire pops, And you feel a flicker of calm that doesn't come from hot bricks or heavy blankets, but from ritual itself. It's not just about being warm enough to sleep, it's about believing you'll be safe enough to wake. Your whispered prayer fades into the stillness. And now your thoughts drift to the rhythms of the season itself. In winter, when darkness lingers for 16 hours or more, the castle feels like it's made for sleeping. You sink deeper into the bedding, realizing that the way you experience sleep here isn't just about blankets and dogs. It's about how time itself is measured. You remember the feast earlier in the evening, when platters of roasted meat, cheese, and bread seemed endless. Winter was a time of preservation: salted pork, smoked fish, barrels of ale, wheels of cheese, and dried beans lined the storerooms. Eating heavily before bed wasn't just indulgence, it was necessity. Fat and protein gave your body fuel to endure the night's bitter chill. Your belly is still full, humming like a furnace. Proof that the castle kitchen knows how to keep its lords alive through frost. Historians still argue whether medieval people naturally practiced segmented sleep. Some evidence suggests they often went to bed soon after dusk, woke in the middle of the night for an hour or two, sometimes to pray, sometimes to talk, sometimes even to sneak a snack before drifting into second sleep until dawn. Others believe this was less universal, more dependent on class and occupation. You lie there, half wondering whether you'll wake again at midnight, eyes wide in the dark, stomach rumbling for leftover stew. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some households, the break between first and second sleep was considered the perfect time for, shall we say, marital activities. Doctors of the day even recommended it, claiming the body was most fertile in that quiet stretch between sleeps. Imagine the advice: forget bedtime or morning, try 2 hours after midnight. Medieval love life, courtesy of circadian rhythms. Diet played a role in rhythms too. Heavy winter feasts slowed bodies, making them drowsy earlier. In summer, lighter meals and longer daylight kept people awake well into the evening. Your sleep schedule wasn't just about preference, it was dictated by sun, season, and whatever food sat in your stomach. Tonight, with the cold pressing in, your body leans into the long rhythm of winter. Eat well, sleep deep, wake only when necessary. And there's the candlelight. With no electric switches, the day ends when the last flame gutters out. In noble chambers, beeswax candles or oil lamps might last longer, but even then, light was precious. Down in the great hall, the fire dims and shadows creep across the rushes, signaling to the sleepers sprawled there that night has claimed the room. You picture it, dozens of bodies rising and falling with breath, bound not just by walls, but by the shared rhythm of darkness. As you pull the covers tighter and burrow in, you realize that medieval sleep wasn't just survival against the cold. It was a dance with nature itself, timed to the length of the night, shaped by what you ate, nudged by ritual, and broken into segments that matched the world outside. Tonight, you're part of that rhythm too, carried along by winter's deep, patient tide. The castle is hushed now, the rhythm of winter sleep holding everyone in its way. Yet as you hover in that twilight between wakefulness and dreams, you can't help but notice how alive the night feels in ways that go beyond hearths, blankets, and bellies. In the Middle Ages, sleep was never just a physical act. It was threaded through with belief, superstition, and the eerie weight of stories whispered in the dark. You roll onto your side, and your dog shifts too, a soft growl rumbling in his chest. Was that just the wind through a crack in the shutters, or something more? People then didn't dismiss the shadows so quickly. Dreams were thought to carry meaning, Sometimes messages from God, other times warnings of doom. You close your eyes and imagine waking from a vivid dream of fire, rushing to the chapel at dawn to confess it before it festers into prophecy. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed every dream was divine, or whether many treated them as entertainment, fodder for breakfast conversation rather than fear. What's certain is that dream. Books, manuals for interpreting. Night visions circulated widely. Flip through one and you'd find bizarre associations. Dream of teeth falling out, and it foretells death. Dream of a river, and prosperity is near. You smile faintly at the thought of your own dreams being dissected by candlelight. Your snores considered omens. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some regions, people tucked charms or even sprigs of herbs under their pillows to ward off nightmares. Valerian rosemary, and even onions were said to guard against evil spirits that prowled the night. Imagine nodding off with an onion tucked beneath your head, convinced it would keep demons at bay. Your bed would smell like a kitchen, but at least you'd feel safe. The castle itself added to the eeriness. The vast stone halls echoed strangely at night, every creak magnified. Legends of restless ghosts or the devil himself. Wandering corridors would have weighed heavily on sleepers' minds. A sudden chill might not just be a draft, it could be a spirit brushing past. And if you stirred awake to find your dog staring fixedly at the corner of the room, well, best not to think too hard about what he saw there. Yet superstition could also be comforting. Sharing stories around the hearth before bed, spinning tales of saints, miracles, and protective charms helped people feel less alone in the darkness. Fear bonded them just as much as warmth did. The belief that God, the saints, or even a sprig of rosemary could protect you gave courage to face the long, cold hours. You nestle deeper under the blankets, dog pressed against your legs, and let your eyelids grow heavy. The cold is still there, the drafts still whisper, but your belly is full, your prayers are said, and the comforting thrum of medieval superstition lulls you toward dreams. Whatever visions the night brings, prophecy, nonsense, or just echoes of pigs snoring in the hall, you're ready to face them. The castle fades slowly, its stone walls softening into shadow, its great hall sighing into silence. The fire dwindles to embers, glowing faintly like tired eyes closing after a long vigil. Around you, the weight of blankets grows heavier, not as a burden, but as an embrace, pinning you gently in place as the cold slips further and further away. Your dog curls tighter against your legs, his breathing steady, the most ancient lullaby of all. Beyond the canopy, the last draft has stilled, or perhaps you've simply stopped noticing. Even the faintest creaks of guards in the corridor blend into the rhythm of sleep, like a heartbeat deep within the castle itself. The night stretches endlessly, but that's no longer a thing to resist. It's something to surrender to. Centuries ago, men and women lay in this same darkness, wrapped in wool and superstition, lulled by the same crackling fire and the same low murmur of the wind. They whispered prayers, told stories, clutched charms, and pressed close to one another, finding in shared breath and body heat a courage greater than any blanket. And now you, too, are part of that long line. You've walked the cold corridors, felt the stone beneath your feet, tasted the stew, heard the snores, and pulled the covers to your chin. You've survived the drafts, the fleas, the eerie echoes of the night. And now, with eyes half closed, you realize the cold is no longer sharp, it's distant, softened, something that belongs to the outside world. Not here, not in this bed. So let the castle sleep. Let the night hold you gently, Let your dreams be simple, soft, and kind. The story is over now. Rest.